Well, Jay, every time we get to do a special episode, I am always impressed with all the folks that we get a chance to talk to. And Bill Werde is no different, although he even has maybe the best sense of humor and a wonderful overview of this industry because of his experience and all the places he's been. But we had just a great time talking to him, and time just sped up because we turned around and, my God, it had been 45 minutes already. And what a blast it was to have a conversation with him.
Yeah, it sure was. And if you don't know, Bill Werde is a director of the Bandier music business program at Syracuse University and author of one of our favorite newsletters, Full Rate, No Cap. He used to be an editorial director at Billboard. He's got great experience, but he's one of those people that educates people on the music industry. And like you said, he's got a wicked sense of humor, and we just really enjoyed the conversation. And we talked about a lot of different topics. So we'll jump right into it. I hope we can get him back on. So without further ado, here is Bill Werde, a special conversation for a bonus Your Morning Coffee podcast. Let it roll.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! Your morning coffee is on the air. 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 On the air.
Standing by.
Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
These students that come in, do they want to be producers, engineers, artists? Do they want to be the next Michael Rapino? Like, is it all over the map? Tell me about your students.
So my students are incredible. I joke a little bit, and I'm only partially joking. They come over the transom, and man, they all have great grades and test scores, and they've all saved babies from burning buildings at one point in their. It's like they're so focused and they're so accomplished. It's really something. It's all over the place in terms of what their career goals are. I think most people that get here, we take 30 students a year. And so I would say, probably half of them come in knowing what they want to do, and half of them don't. They just know they want to work in the music business. And then, usually within the first year, the half that come in knowing what they want to do, they all want to do something different, 6-12 months later. It's a coded business, right? Like if you're on the outside of it, or you haven't spent time inside of it, or you don't know a bunch of people in it, it's a pretty hard thing to get the lay of the land. Right? Yeah. There's not this flow chart of all the jobs and all the roles and what they do and what skills you need. And so, I think for a lot of our students in their first year here, they read the Passman book, which is a good broad exposure to sort of the different parts of the business. We have this weekly lecture series. I got to get you guys up here one of these days, but we have this weekly lecture series, and we're really blessed to just have had a string of absolutely incredible folks come. And that's, those are off the record conversations. They're very frank. And I kind of bring by design all the different sectors, all the different types of people, all the different jobs. So, after the first year in the program, they just have so much more knowledge about the way the business works, the different types of jobs that are out there. And then you'll start to see they kind of start to gravitate. But I will say most of our graduates work in management, labels, publishers, the live business, right? Like promoters, agents kind of thing. And streaming companies to an extent. We're starting to see some in the best ways, some like more tech forward people, folks that want to, experiment with Web3, folks that are playing around with generative tech, things like that. So, I think we're, there's a lot of great programs out there, I think, and they all kind of tackle this in a different way or have their own kind of flavor for it. I think, so yeah, I'll just pause there.
And how much do kids now have such, obviously they can look up and find anything. What kind of knowledge do they bring in? Are they, I would assume you probably get kind of the gamut of kids that just love music and that's all they know. Yeah. But also kids that have dug deep already. And is that kind of, do you get this kind of broad spectrum of kids in terms of their knowledge walking in the door?
We do. I mean, every once in a while I'll get a freshman in who I'm like, wow, I think that person might know more than me at this point. But I will say, thankfully, that's pretty rare. I think what more often than not happens is they're very united in their passion for music. They have done at least enough research to understand that there's a business out there. Interestingly, I think that Taylor Swift and some of her positions about the business that have been really public have opened a lot of younger people's eyes to the fact that there is a business out there. So when I first started here and I started recruiting events, I mistakenly assumed that my job would be convincing people that the Bandier program was a great option for them. What I learned really quickly is I really had to sort of explain to people that there was a music industry. And then I found if I was the person that sort of broke it down for them and made it compelling and made them understand what it was and what the opportunities were, then they would want to come study with me. But yeah, I think it's just, Taylor Swift is a big factor there. I think Ticketmaster is another one of those, I guess a cousin to Taylor Swift in a certain kind of way. But, all the complaining you see people doing on social media about Spotify is all these things sort of start to make people realize, oh, wait, there's a business there. There's someone making decisions. There's, rates and what does that mean? And so, yeah, they come in, it's all across the board. But as you can appreciate, I think, like I said earlier, these are some of the brightest 17, 18-year-olds that you could meet. Yeah. Expecting them to know a ton about the music business is a lot, right?
Yeah. But it's also, this business is complex by design, and better than anyone, with publishing, masters, neighboring rights, PROs, and we could go on and on and on with acronyms and copyright royalty board, and just, you can go deep into the weeds. And I always find that when you try to explain some of these things to, let's say, your parents, their eyes gloss over. It's like the craziest business on the planet. And I know everybody who's involved in any kind of business says, oh, well, my business is different than your business. But, at the end of the day, you want to make more money than you pay out and treat people right. So it's not that different. But talk about your approach to this massive world of all of these different verticals and things, and trying to kind of organize that into a way that these kids can digest it.
I'm still thinking about this Thanksgiving trying to explain neighboring rights to my father. So you got to give me a second.
Good luck with that.
Just to get off of that. Yeah. He's already fallen asleep at that meal real quick. I think that would just exacerbate the whole. I got to get Willard from Cobalt to explain neighboring rights to my father. And then that I would just grab many bags of popcorn and really enjoy the hell out of that. I think that we approach it. It's an interesting question, right? I'll be on, the Reddit music industry boards, just kind of reading, for example, and people love, inevitably every week, someone will post should I go to a music business program? Should I go to a music business master's program? I'm trying to get started in this industry. And everyone loves to be no, don't do it. It's a waste. No one's ever hired anyone because of their degree. And I don't disagree with that. You might think I would. I disagree with the don't do it part. But I don't disagree with the idea that no one's ever hired anyone because of a degree, right? The degree is almost irrelevant. It's the things that lead to that degree, the experiences that we structure, the skills that you're able to build, the relationships that you're able to develop, the network that you inherit and can use if you do those other three things really well, that will get you a job. And that's why we place such an enormously high percentage of our graduates into jobs, because we view it that way. Right? I think to me, that's one of the most important scorecards that we have is, are our students graduating into roles that they basically want? And the answer overwhelmingly is yes. So, to the people out there that are like, academia is a waste, it's stupid, don't do it. If you're accomplishing everything you want to be accomplishing right now, awesome, cool. Like you figured it out. That's great. And you can figure it out, but it's awfully hard, right? Like most people have a hard time boiling the ocean. Most people have a hard time, if they don't already know it, understanding the difference between disinformation and good information. Most people have a hard time understanding, well, like if all of the knowledge I need to succeed in the music business is viewed as like a book, what are the chapters of that book? What are the most important sections of each chapter? Like, how do I flow that in the right order? So there's a certain amount of just like intelligent curation and development that we do. And then I think there's a lot of experiential learning that we're able to create that becomes really just critically important. Like our students graduate, they've built marketing decks that are based on the actual marketing decks that their current favorite artists are using. They've done the accounting on streaming campaigns. They've like the things that are going to really help your music industry IQ. The things that I know and people are talking about in bars and talking about at the shows. Those are the conversations. We have something Monday morning called Convo, and that's actually why I created Full Rate No Cap. Originally, students would come in and they'd bring whatever stories they wanted to talk about, and we discuss the headlines, the trends, the biggest stories of the week.
Love that.
But what I started seeing, 4 years ago was with the explosion of TikTok in particular. There had always been some bad information out there, obviously, but man, like there were so many self-appointed music industry gurus. And I think it's understandable that like young people, or frankly, people of any age, will occasionally confuse the number of someone's followers with the sense that they actually have in their head. And I started creating this email of like, well, here's, rather than pulling in some of the stories you're pulling in, which sound sexy, but are kind of nonsense, I'm going to create this walled garden. Here's like 5, 6, 7 stories that we can pick from this week, and let's pick those stories. And then it just kind of went from there. But I'm saying this because like the students lead those discussions, right? So a lot of this, I think a lot of what we do in this program is about developing the human skills, the approaches, the tools, right? Like I think the most revelatory important thing that I teach my students, it's not the implications of generative tech. It's not neighboring rights. It's not, right? It's how to use a calendar. You know what I mean? Like you can probably appreciate this, but the reason people succeed, knowledge is the price of poker. If you don't have the knowledge, like you're not in the game. If you don't understand how a deal is structured, if you don't understand, the rights, the royalties, the dynamics, like you're not in the game. But then there's like a lot of people that are graduating with these degrees or watching the right videos on YouTube or reading the right books. And like, you have that stuff down, but like, why don't some of those people make it? I've always been obsessed with this, right? Because I told you, like I started on the wrong path. I had no ins. I had no friends in the business. Like it was just, and yet somehow I made it. Like why? Why did this kid from Delaware who seemed to be on a horrible path make it? Why do the people that succeed? And it's usually not the big idea. It's usually not, right? It's not those things. It's execution. It's, can you learn to trust your best work and just get it out there every day? Or, do you get paralyzed? Do you go fetal when you don't know the next thing to do? Do you wake up and feel less than, like we all do? Like we all feel that way. We all feel like imposters. Like you put out this great email, which I love, by the way, sincerely. I love. And like, I'm sure there's some days where, you sit down to the blank screen and you're like, I feel like crap today. And I think I'm a moron. And I don't know why I keep putting out this email because I'm sending it into the void and no one cares. And like, what am I doing with my life? Like we could get deep into the therapy session. I know that you feel that way because every time I open up a blank MailChimp interface to start writing Full Rate No Cap, every time I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, what am I doing? No one cares. Like, I'm a moron. Like, this is going to be terrible. I don't even know what I think about this story. Like, this is the issue I'm going to create. And the world is going to be like, oh, this guy's dumb. Like, we revoke your pass to have any access to the music business. You are done in life. Like, right. But these are the voices in our heads. And the only thing that separates me, I think, from lots of other people in some way is I'm still willing to do it. You work past those moments. And so I say all this, and I'm sorry, I'm talking too much.
No, not at all.
But this is what I focus on a lot in this program. This is why I love doing what I do. Yes, I think there's lots of schools where you can learn the rights and the royalties and the basics of the business. And there's lots of other ways you can learn that. And I think they're all good. I'd like to think we do it better. But the margin there is not huge, right? Between the best and the worst, right? We can all teach the Passman book. We can all teach a few other books. But this cadet company approach to like, not in the Instagram meme sort of way, right? We all want that to work. We're like, oh, if I just read the right inspirational Instagram post, I'm going to be so much better in life, right? And it's like I hate that. I hate like the grindcore dudes that are out there like, no days off. Like, no, shut up. Like, you're so dumb. I hate you. I hate you so much. Like, take days off, but like be intentional. Right? Like you have, can you take a big idea and turn it into smaller steps? Can you take those steps and put it on a time management system that works for you so that when you wake up next Thursday and you're struggling with imposter syndrome, all you have to do is put left foot over right, and you're not going to waste a day, and you're not going to make the hole deeper, right? These are the reasons I think why most people succeed or why they don't. And being able to teach 17 to 21-year-olds that is just like, I love it.
Yeah. Do you touch on, I remember, and we talked earlier about both of our parents were public school teachers. And, I knew my parents and my dad especially would just like look at what I was doing. And it was just so outside of his experience in the workforce, and in the music business, people get laid off all the time. You're switching jobs and, that is a part of the music business. Do you touch on that and kind of that you really do need this, really thick skin, and it's easy to look in the mirror and go, why me? Why did I get punted this time? But is that part of what you talk about, basically?
Well, I think rather than, we do talk about it and we bring some focus and intention to it, but I think rather than, what's the Frank Zappa quote? Like writing about music is like dancing about architecture.
Yeah.
It's like, how do we put students into situations where they just experience that? Right? How do we put students into situations where they're no longer afraid to speak up in the room, where like part of getting past that fear is recognizing that like your idea is going to be better if you let people hammer on it, right? I think social media has made this generation pretty wary and given some folks the wrong idea in the context of like binary thinking, right? This is either right or it's wrong. It's either good or it's bad. And so I think in that world, sometimes if someone says something in a classroom and I'm like, hey, you know what? I love that you said that thing, but have you thought about X, Y, and Z? Then there's going to be other people in that room who are like, oh, like that person just got dunked on. And it's like, no, we're not. No one got dunked on. Like, let's rewind. Like there is no dunking, right? There's just like, we're making good ideas better. We're making, bad ideas good and good ideas great. Like, and that takes collaboration. That takes fearlessness. It takes a reorientation of the mind to think, listen, there was a guy at Billboard when I worked there, and he had a 99 no's to a yes. He's a sales guy. He had 99 no's to a yes behind him. And I used to be like, man, what an awful job. I got to call people and be like, I am coming to bring you coverage. And they would love to hear from me. But like this guy had to call people and be like, I am coming for you to write me a check. And that's like not a call anyone wants, right? Especially not in some of those days, in the mid 2000s or whatever. But I have thought about that so many times since then, just that recontextualization, right? And again, not in a grindcore, stupid, like, okay, great, like that's a nice slogan, and now you have to actually live it, right? But if you can actually live it, if you can see these little setbacks we experience all the time, all day, every day, as, okay, that's my opportunity to grow. I just like, now I can learn, right? I just think that's so powerful. So trying to get students into those situations where they just like, it's moving too fast for you to spend time with your fear, where I'm kind of forcing people, like new teachers will ask a room, hey, who has questions? More experienced teachers will just ask students questions, right? Mm-hmm. And like kind of creating that little bit of like with goodwill, forced engagement, so that it, like pretty soon you're no longer forcing it. Pretty soon people are just wired. They show up in that class and they're like, they're ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah, you just touched on the speed in which things move in the music industry, and I'm sure in education. And it wasn't that long ago we were talking about master tones, and it wasn't that long ago we were talking about downloads and, NFTs and DAOs and things. And it's moving. We like to joke around that it's changed while we've been having this conversation. But I feel like we're in a special place now with something you mentioned a moment ago, generative AI and some of the things that are happening. And yeah, everything evolves, and it was sort of crappy when it first sort of started coming out, and then it started getting better and better and better. And now it's sort of scary at some of the things that you can generate with a text prompt or with some of these platforms that we're playing with. Talk about how you approach some of these newer technologies as you educate these students.
Yeah, well, so for starters, you just made me anxious when you were like, oh, like it's changed since we've been on this call. Like I had to stop myself from grabbing my phone and being like what's changed? Because like something has changed. I think on one hand, from a structural perspective, we just launched a new master's program mostly for career change folks, like folks that have an undergraduate degree, but it wasn't the music business and they're struggling to get in. Like we can get you there in 18 months. That program and the undergraduate program, like we designed courses with like optionality, right? Because in academia, it takes if I wanted to change my whole curriculum right now, it would take me like 2.5 years or something like that before it went through all the different approvals it needs to go through and the state signed off on it. And then we implemented the new curriculum. It's like publishing a book, literally. Only it's like a book that, if I started today with an idea for a book, it would take me a year to write it. It would take 9 months for it to blah, 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 right? Like, so that's not a speed that works to keep up with the pace of change. Not for books, which is why we only use one book, and that's the Passman book, and definitely not for curriculum. So a lot of our courses, like we have a course that is literally emerging tech for the music industry, and it's designed to be a holding pen. So, this semester we'll be teaching artificial intelligence, generative tech, through both a production and a marketing standpoint. Current best practices in social media will probably see some touches there. Emerging markets would fit into the emerging technologies class. Web3 we've taught there, 3D printing we've taught there, like the things that are moving so quickly, and we want our students to have hands-on, experiential kind of industry-facing relationships to these things. So we design our courses in that way, I would say, and then significantly, we have the Wednesday night lecture series. So we had, who'd we have? We had like the CEO of Boomi, one of the larger generative tech companies, up on campus last semester. Convo, that session where we have the full program together and we're just, using full rate, no cap to talk about the headlines and the trends. That's another opportunity where we can really just stay on the bleeding edge, frankly. And students are taking apart those stories, really critically thinking, with me sort of as the guide rail, really critically thinking about, okay, if this is a trend and it plays out, what does that mean for the business? Does this create an opportunity or a challenge for me as a 20-year-old? Right? So there's so many different ways that I think our program creates spaces and intentional dialogue and experiences around this. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. And how do you kind of cover sort of ethics? And one of the stories that Jay and I had talked about that really...
Sorry, what? Ethics?
I know, it's a weird word.
No, I'm kidding. Everyone, all my colleagues here at Newhouse, I think they think that I literally teach my students how to be unethical. Like, oh, it's the music business.
The music business.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, are you teaching them how to pick pockets as freshmen and then they work their way up to corporate espionage? It's like, come on.
It has a sketchy history for sure.
Right, exactly. But, and so one of the stories that popped up, and I know you certainly saw it, was what's going on over Atlantic Records, where you have a new person running the show, and it's the son, a very young man, not that that's unethical, but it's also the son of one of your major competitors, which is maybe, again, not illegal, not maybe unethical, but it's kind of weird. How do you kind of cover these things in your class with your students? How do you explain that?
Well, it's interesting. I think when it comes to the Atlantic record, I'm just laughing, man, because I'm going to get myself in so much trouble. I think with the Atlantic Records thing, the Atlantic Records movement, of course, and the move away from Julie and her team into the Elliott era, on one hand, it's an onion, right? There's so many layers to it. And I think for my students, the layers that are most relevant are like, what do we need to be paying attention to here? If you're thinking about like your next 5 years, what does this move mean for you? I always come back to that. Like, does this create opportunity? Does it remove opportunity? Don't get scared by headlines. Think about your reality. Think about what's in front of you. Think about your opportunities. Think about what you can build, what you can do. And so, on that level, I mean, I just think, they've let go of a lot of people. I'm sure they're, usually post restructures like this, there's particularly at entry level and junior level, there's usually some new hiring that needs to be done. Maybe not tomorrow, but ultimately, right? They're going to have to fill in the gaps on some things. But the other level of this, right? This is like if you pitch this as a storyline for Succession, the TV show, they'd be like, no, this is too ridiculous. Like, this is, we can't, no one would do that. Right. Like, and you start, and that's not a conversation. Like, I don't know that most of my students fully appreciate that, like the role of Val Blavatnik as a board member and his buddy nature with Elliot and like the drama of this really, and like the playbook of this is fascinating to me, but it might be on a level that like we can geek out about, or maybe some of your readers can geek out about because they have that context. If I can, I'll tell you my read on it. If we can talk a little shit here for a minute.
Of course.
On one hand, listen, my first reaction to this was, wow, like Warner didn't do Elliot any favors. Like, what Warner basically did, this is my first read, was, they created this situation where like the whole fucking industry is going to be rooting against Elliot Grange. They would have probably been anyway because of nepotism, and no one loves that story. But now you took one of the true icons of the business in Julie Greenwald, a person who everyone loved, right? I mean, sometimes you'd be on the wrong side of the negotiating table from her, or you didn't do the right thing by her, and then maybe you didn't love Julie Greenwald.
Highly respected.
I have some funny stories about that, but like, I would go out all the time and I would talk to the people that worked for these people. And so I knew which of the label presidents, like their teams would take a bullet for them and which ones their teams would love to see bullets go flying right past them. And Julie universally, she built a culture there and a respect there. And it's not an overstatement to say that without Julie's work, there would not have been an Atlantic Records at multiple times over the last couple of decades. That was like sheer force of will territory at different times. So it did seem to me at first like the second the market share dropped, they made their move. Because if you look at the release schedule, like I think Atlantic will rebound in the next year from a market share perspective. And I don't think that's because Elliot is there. I think that's just the nature of release schedules. And I think that they wanted to move on for reasons. And they moved the second they had the opportunity to do it. The second that, there was a little bit of weakness, they moved. Now, the thing that a lot of people wanted to believe, and I was like this too. When I first saw it, I was like, I can't believe they did Julie like that. Julie deserved a lot better. And that's true, right? Like I think that's inarguably true. You should put her blood, sweat, tears, soul, spine, everything into that place for, 20 years. And if nothing else, what Warner just showed every one of my students is that loyalty ends this way, right? Like not a good look. At the same time, the more I thought about it, like Julie is so fierce and so smart, right? So play this out, right? Like you're Len Blavatnik or Val Blavatnik or, Kinsel or whatever, and you sit down with Julie and this is the way the conversation goes in the heads of lots of people who think it should have gone this way. Julie, we love you. You've done God's work for 2 decades. We've made a strategic decision here at the company. We're going to head in a different direction, but we want to do right by you. What does that look like? And in my opinion, and I've talked to some people about this who know the folks involved, in my opinion, if Warner handled it that way, there would have been bodies all over the Hudson. Like part of what makes Julie great is like her ability to like play hardball there. Right. So like, it's like, I don't know that Warner had an option really in that regard, just in that specific regard. Because if they went to her nice and said, hey, let's figure this out, I think what she would have figured out is like how to get a meteor to hit like Blavatnik and Kinsel's house. Number one. And then number two, going back to this idea of did they do Elliot any favors? I think once you make that decision, the next decision is it has to be a red wedding. You know what I mean by that? Like a little Game of Thrones reference, like the wedding where like everyone gets invited and then like all the key, everyone gets executed.
Yeah.
I think it had to go that way because I will say this as someone who's a little bit of a nerd for organizational theory and leadership theory, Elliot walking around, like right now, everyone outside of that building is rooting against Elliot. But if they didn't get rid of all of Julie's lieutenants, everyone inside of that building would have been rooting against Elliot. Mm-hmm. So we can say what we want about the competency or the strange moves that have been made there since this change has sort of started playing out. But at least there are people that I think Elliot feels he can count on. So again, I don't like any of this. I want to be crystal clear about it.
Sure.
But if like reading divorcing myself from my personal feelings and just objectively looking at the situation like an analyst, I don't know that I have a different answer other than keep Julie, which is a different answer. And I think she deserved maybe a little more time.
Right. Right. Well, as we wind this thing down, I have two things I want to leave with. One is we'd love to have you back on again. We could talk with you for hours. We really appreciate you coming on and talking with us. The other one I want to sort of end on is, as the husband of an educator, one of the most amazing things, and I get it with some of my interns, is when you see them grow and leave the nest and they succeed and you see them out in the wild. Talk a little bit about those students that you've worked with that are now flourishing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the best, right? Like you plant seeds and you give them everything you can, but you never really know how it's going to go. And all you can do is get them ready for the show. But then you get out there and it takes on a whole life of its own. I mean, listen, on one hand, there's folks like even dating back to my time at Billboard, I had an intern who came in. I thought she was great. I think she thought she wanted to be maybe a manager at the time, marketer or something. And she was publishing this blog and it was great. She was like regularly, it was an A&R blog. She was like regularly discovering, I'd listened to her stuff and it was amazing. And I think I reached out to her and it turned out she was a student in the Bandier program. And I invited her to come be my intern, and she showed up, and she was like really, like she was one of those like young people that like didn't make a ton of eye contact, and the handshake wasn't quite as firm as it probably should have been, and she seemed like she didn't know how great she was. And there's nothing better as a teacher when you see someone's greatness and they don't see it yet, and you help them see it. So at the time, I was shooting like a 1-minute show for Fuse. It was like a news interstitial. And I asked her to be the intern for that show. She had to prepare some stories, whatever. But we would shoot it in the Billboard offices in this like tiny little office upstairs. And like the Fuse TV guy would come over and the producer of the show would come over. And it would just be the two of them and me and this intern. And I kind of made her tell a joke every shoot day. Before we would get started with the shoot, she had to tell us a joke. And, obviously, like what I was really trying to do was just kind of get her out of her shell because I thought she was phenomenal. And I told her, by the way, like you should be an A&R, not because you're incredible at this. Really. I mean, truly. Anyway, that intern turned out to be Gabs Landman, who is, VP of A&R at Warner Chappell, Amy Allen, who's the biggest songwriter in the world's manager. And she's still, and we just had a board meeting for the Bandier program yesterday and she was there for it. And it's just like, I mean, that's an extreme version of that story, but just, I don't know, in our program, we really get to know our students, right? This isn't one of those programs where you're a number. We've got 120 students at any given time across the 4-year program. So I know you, I know what you're about. I know what you're working on. I teach you in my capstone class. Like, you have to come in, build a business. I'm in the weeds with you. And like, I think they're incredible. And like the privilege of watching these people grow from 17, 18-year-olds to 21, 22-year-olds, and then go off into the world and like you bump into them in a bar or you talk, it's like, I don't know, man, it's so cool. It's the best.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bill. God, it's been such a pleasure. I've certainly heard and seen your name so much and know about the program. And what a treat it has been to have you on and talk about it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys, man. You're doing God's work with your email, and I mean that. I had to stop sending out mine in the I lost my mom the top part of the year.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
So
and really had to kind of if it wasn't like my day job or taking care of some family, I had to kind of throw it overboard for a minute. We're going to be getting back to it, but we're actually, I'm building a team of producers now that are students that want to work with it. And we use your email all the time. So
amazing. Thank you.
I think it's fantastic. And you guys
much appreciated. Well, let's do this again, Bill. It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.